Trust happens when leaders are transparent. Coming up. On the fourth day of the EFF conference in Nasrec, Julius Malema has thrown some jabs towards Sizwe Mpofu, claiming that his podcast is an MK podcast. He continued and said EFF will never attend any interview on that podcast. Check this out.
We're going to work with all newspapers, radio stations. We're going to work with all the podcasters. But we can't go to podcasts of other political parties. Like that one of the son of Dalimbouf. We can't go there. That thing is for MK, it's not for us. So let him continue to interview MK people. I mean, it's like EFF podcast going to interview Fikile Mbalula. He will never allow that. So don't ask us witchcraft, that we must do things that are unacceptable. Every podcast, Shem, Lejabu DJs boo barigidi hustle. Reno ya. Auna more saying because Rena, we are not hiding anything from anyone. We go everywhere. My regards to my office, to other political parties. So it's as simple as that. The argument that it was formed before MK, how can it become MK? Those who are MK, they were born before MK. They are older than MK, so how did they become MK? If being born before doesn't make you MK, that logic doesn't make sense. They must interview their fathers.
There we go, right there. They must interview their fathers, right? You can tell exactly. That's a bullet directed to Sizwe Mpofu. So that means his sin is being a son to Dalimpofu, which in my view is very unfair.
Comrades, we are going to intensify our internal communication, strengthen our communication. We are going to make sure that we professionalize our podcast and make sure that our podcast is driven by national consciousness, not some ruralitarian perspective, not some backwardness. It must have a producer. That producer must be someone with a background in the media, tried and tested. And I'm told there's one who was fired in 405. I must look for that producer that was fired in 405 and hire him.
I must give it to Malema though. I love the fact that he's embracing podcast, because whether you like it or not, podcasts are the future and they are giving the mainstream media a run for their money.
So we must professionalize our podcast. Comrades, our podcast is not political education podcast, it's podcast. So you can't want to see people talking about Marx, Lenin, and Fanon every day on that podcast. Otherwise, you'll watch it alone. It has to be attractive to even non-political people, because some voters of the EFF may not be interested in its literature. So you need to bring all different kinds of people. Be a celebrity, be an artist, be an actor, be a musician, well-known businessman, emerging young entrepreneur. Those are the people who must be bringing into our podcast.
If you were to ask me, I think Malema here is just playing a political card, because you'll recall that Sizwe Mpofu has addressed the issue of EFF, saying that he has invited them several times, but EFF decided not to come to his podcast. And all other parties came, including MK, of course.
The DA is not a branch of the ANC. Helen Zille is not a member of the ANC. And the African National Congress must be given space and time to resolve its internal issues.
As always, having to feel guilty that we have a relationship with Russia.
Let's come to the EFF. And I want to say this, and I hope that some people in the EFF and EFF members are listening to this, because, again, to bring it back to the podcast briefly, it's quite sad for me to see that there are some people in the EFF who have fallen for this idea that just because MK people accept my invitations to do interviews, and indeed often sometimes break news on the channel, that I am somehow only inviting MK guests onto this platform, and that I'm trying to pursue some kind of MK agenda, or worse, I'm trying to destroy the EFF with this podcast, right? That's just petty, naive, and unfair. Many people in the EFF will know that I constantly invite EFF leaders onto SMWX, but what is sad to me is that ever since I interviewed Floyd, EFF has decided not to come onto my podcast. And I'm hoping it's just a short-term thing. I understand that the party is like, there are a lot of people who are angry with Floyd and I brought him on and therefore they transfer that onto me. But I don't get this idea that because I interview people from MK that I am some kind of MK mouthpiece. The irony is I was always accused of being an EFF mouthpiece. And because I had one interview with Floyd, now suddenly I'm an MK mouthpiece. The EFF they boycott ENCA and the mainstream, and sometimes they don't like Newsroom. And I've seen them say that SABC is now an MK platform. And then they can't also boycott digital media because there'll be no media left. No media will always be full of praise for any one political party, but that doesn't mean you then boycott the platform or whatever. So I'm confident EFF will come back on SMWX. I'll keep inviting them. But this is one thing that I would say. MK has figured out the power of digital media. And this platform and many other great podcasts that there are in South Africa, whether we talk about Dan Corder, whether we talk about the Hustlers Corner, DJ Spoo, Convo, all those platforms that are just have MacG, obviously that's in a more culture space. But if you are continuing to ignore the power of these platforms, then you're living in a bygone, dead era, right? If you're running onto all these mainstream platforms that don't really get the views they're used to, that people are tuned out of, then you haven't figured out how to communicate in this part of the 21st century. So MK Party, what I will give them credit for is they figured out the power of this platform and many other platforms. And so when I invite people, they come. So, and I'm not going to stop inviting people from MK either. Why? Because the public wants to know what they think. And every time I do MK content, it gets lots of views, which is my viewers telling me that they want to keep watching that kind of content. So that's what's happened here, is that I invite people from every party, continue to invite DA, ANC. I'm actually glad, big ups to the ANC, because they seem to have figured out to come as well. And many ANC people are now coming onto the podcast. I think they've realized the reach of digital media in South Africa now. And I'll continue to invite EFF, but I've gotten to the point where if you don't want to come onto the platform, it's now your loss and not mine. And I'll continue to invite everyone, but I'm just going to keep doing the interviews.
So you will remember that Sizwe Mpofu Walsh is a son to Dali Mpofu, who has joined MK. So it makes sense why Julius talks like that. As you know, he doesn't want anything to do with MK. And again, if you were to ask me, I think Julius Malema once again has it all wrong, because he's binding Sizwe Mpofu in one belt with his father, who is, of course, has joined MK. And he thinks that Sizwe Mpofu might be an affiliate with MK, which might not be true. And again, in my thinking, I think Julius Malema is missing the point once again, because in his thinking, he thinks that just because Sizwe Mpofu is a son to Dali Mpofu, that means Sizwe might be an affiliate with an MK, which might not be true. And if you look at the pattern of thinking, you may notice that this is the very same pattern of thinking that he has towards Ndlozi. Because in his thinking, he thinks that just because Ndlozi is a friend, he was or is a friend to Floyd, that means Ndlozi is an affiliate with MK. which again might not be true. Ndlozi is an EFF and he has renewed his membership as an EFF member.
Dr. Ndlozi is a member of the EFF, he's a leader of the EFF, and there is no any organization that can claim him except the EFF. So you must not listen to me. EFF. What's a not the leader right EFF. Member EFF or renewing the membership is in the membership system of the EFF. They think they can divide this organization. They will never divide this organization. We are one thing, marching into the NPA as a collective of leadership that is united more than ever before.
And lately, Ndlozi sent a tweet wishing all the top 6 of the EFF all the best, congratulating them, in fact. But because he once was or is still a friend with Floyd, Malema doesn't want to hear anything. Well, that's my thinking. What do you think? Let me hear your comment below, and of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.